Fabulous. Okay, so today is July 24th. My name is Rose Capo. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here today with
Krystin Anderson.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Can you start by telling me when and where you were born?
I was born March 1st, 2000.
Nice. And would you share a little bit about your relationship to your Floridian identity?
Yeah, I think it has changed since coming to UF and experiencing that some Floridians are not from the Floridian. But the Broward, Miami area is very much like Caribbean, Latin, just kind of everything is meshed up. And it's been such an impactful part of my identity as an American in general, but also specifically as a Floridian, because I've grown up in the melting pot that is America's ideal. So I've seen, I've gone down the street and here's my grocery store where it's Pakistani people selling halal food, and then to the next market, which is a bodega run by Puerto Rican people, and then is a Brazilian bakery that makes the best bread and cheese. So it's been a very much cultured mix, and I think it's a big part of my Floridian identity, because just the mixes of cultures that we have here are really unique. It's been such an impactful part of me understanding myself too and my culture. So before I'm a Floridian, I'm also a Jamaican. And so that's been a huge part of being a Floridian, is being able to stay in Jamaican community and have groups of people I can speak Pato with and make the food that I'm used to, and jerk chicken and everybody knows what's going on. So yeah, it's definitely been a great place to understand culture and identity.
Absolutely. And what does the term queer mean to you, and how does it inform who you are as a person?
Queer is the term I identify with, but I kind of got there through a long road. But what does it mean to me in general is just an umbrella of all of the people past midpoint on that spectrum of sexuality. It's kind of straight, straight, you get here, and then everyone from then on is just queer, raging queer. So yeah, queer is just that whole half over here. And I think for me, the reason that I identify more with queer is there's a lot of silly misconceptions about the term bi. There's a lot of other terms that people kind of farther over here have come up with for things that everyone else doesn't know what that means, demisexual, pansexual, whatnot. And I think a lot of people identify with a lot of things like that. So for me, it took some time with playing around with different terms and being this one feels like me, but nobody knows what that is. This one feels like me, but everybody thinks that it just means you want a threesome. This one feels like me, but there's nobody else who identifies with this term, and it's alienating. So queer has been the one I've gone with since I've talked to people about being queer, because it just kind of is more community. It's more everybody. It's more welcoming. It's everyone over there and anything. And it's just kind of I'm one of them, and you don't have to be so specific. So
absolutely. And there's a huge history with it too, just how the terms evolved.
Oh, for sure. Sure.
Yeah, looks good. And what does queer community mean for you?
This has been a rough one. Queer community for me really means the people who care about queer things, and not just health and safety, but queer jokes, and understand what I was before it was viral, and just all of the things that are in queer culture, from style to history, is queer community. But unfortunately, it also means a formalized group of people that tie themselves to a title. And so a lot of times, especially with the whole being in the US, there's a lot of groups that will say our fight is for this. And if it's a queer community, usually that means their fight is for LGBT topics, which unfortunately means that they don't have a lot of space to fight for people of color, to fight for immigrants, to fight for abortion rights, to fight for all these other things that are not what people see as directly under the queer community's problems. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword in that I've worked with a lot of queer groups or like queer clubs, organizations on campus, or resources, that the resources and like the things that they're making are just so targeted to one group of queer people instead of all of the queer community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And maybe not always recognizing like that intersectionality
Definitely.
that comes with just all these identities.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like if there's any group of people that should have thought about all of that, it should be the queer people. But it happens all the time also. We see it all the time. Like if there's a group of people that has to fight for something, it's like, we have to fight for this, and that's all we can fight for. It happened with the Women's March, that they wanted to push all the Black women out. It happens with like anything that people are fighting. They're like, that's the thing we're fighting. So
Yeah, a one view lens. With that being said, do you think you have found a version of queer community in Florida, or what does that look like for you finding that in the state of Florida?
Yeah, I think I've been able to kind of mold it just with like getting to know people and getting to know spaces, especially with like online and having access to everybody. There's a lot of like things on social media, like certain groups will put things and you know that this group does stuff for like everybody. But you know certain groups like this is just for gay men. Not even for like trans people, not for anybody else. It's for gay men. So it's been good, like with the internet, to be able to kind of go on Twitter and see what other people are saying about this group of queer people, and like, is this actually a queer community, or is this just like just this fight?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I'm interested in the narratives from self-identifying queer Floridians because as I went deeper into my studies, I found that there is little academic literature that focuses on queer young adults in Florida and how they use the digital age as a supplemental resource for their sex education, considering Florida's sex education requirements do not require the curricula to be comprehensive. That's why I'm archiving. So my next couple of questions will be discussing the internet and how that supported your sex education as a queer person in Florida. So growing up in Generation Z, have you used digital mediums that have informed your sex education?
It's only been them. It's only been them. Sex ed in South Florida schools is, first of all, they split you into two classes. And it's a class of like the boys class, the girls class. And the girls class just talks about periods for a day. The boys class talks about boners. Is this really it? That's all that's different. And then when we come back together, we talk about like the biology of making a child. Not even like, this is what must happen to go into it. This is how it might hurt if the woman is not even ready for you to be in her. Like this is all of the, no. It's just like, all right, we're all together. Babies happen here. So it was super basic. And I think there was two. There was that 5th grade one, which is the split up, come back together. And then the 8th grade one was like, it was just kind of like a biology lesson, a very in-depth biology lesson. And there was never like a discussion with a person. There was never, ever an opportunity for students to submit questions, which is crazy. So all of us went to either each other with our questions, just dumb for a whole bunch of 8th graders to be doing, or we went to Google or whatever other sources online that we went to. So I would say the internet is literally responsible for anything that I actually know about sex ed, because class didn't teach me anything. Even the whole day about periods didn't teach me any of the useful stuff. Nothing meaningful. Like I never knew that there was period panties until I just got them as an adult this year. I never knew that there was Diva Cups until I got to college, and there was an organization, Planned Parenthood, was giving them out. I never knew there was O-rings, Nexplanon arm implants, all of this. I thought birth control is a pill you take every day, and not like, oh, there's like 80 different birth controls I could choose. Like, we learn nothing. So even what I've learned about birth control has been like either from commercials, like TV ads. They're obviously trying to target you. Marina, Kylina, Skyla, whatever.
Shout out.
Shout out to Kylina. But yeah, it's all been weird, fragmented, kind of random hearsay, what comes across my timeline, what somebody else told me.
Things like that. So how did these platforms become accessible to you, and like which specific ones stick out in your mind that really helped you understand and inform your sex education, or just like how you identify as a queer person?
How it became accessible. It's kind of slowly over time. I think everyone has a story of something weird that happened in computer lab, elementary school. Like somebody looked something up, whether it be the freaking blue waffle, which I never wanted to see. There was so many just like things like that, like things that we all know what it is when you say that name. But if you weren't like an internet kid at that age, you just wouldn't have known. So that was like the first like access to like vagina or like any of this stuff. And my parents are very much like traditional Jamaican old school people. Not old school. They're a little bit more like open to things, but they're definitely Christian. And that's another thing that's like hard dealing with in Florida is like Florida and generally the South, our Christians are like, these are like no Christians I've seen before. The Christians in the South are just a different branch of Christianity, I swear. So my friends are not them, thank God. But they definitely were not gonna sit us down and talk about sex. So I remember in elementary school, my parents sat me down and they were like, what is sex? I was like, they were like, what do you think sex is? And genuinely in fourth grade, I was like, two people get naked, they lay in the bed, and then they hug all night. I genuinely thought that's what it was. And then instead of saying anything or like having the sex talk, they were like, okay, go to bed. I was like, okay. I guess I answered right. They weren't stressed about it. So then in middle school, when after the second conversation in school, and then everyone in school starts talking and texting and whatever, there was this boy that I liked that I was texting, and he's just saying all these things he's gonna do to me, which I didn't know what they were. So some of the things I'm there Googling, I'm like, sideways? What is that? I don't even know what these mean. Yeah. So my friends at this time also would go through my phone. And so they went through my phone, saw a list of the texts he sent. We're like, you're not talking to him no more. We're taking this phone, nothing. So then my sex ed just kind of got more like cloudy because it's like, first of all, I don't know what he was really saying, but I know that I got in big trouble for it. So what was he talking about? I didn't get to look everything up that he had mentioned. So there's still stuff that he said that I'm like, I've never heard this term. What does that mean? So I think that from like early on, there was kind of that like fear and like shame and like guilt about it. Mm-hmm. But as I discovered that I was a queer identifying person, which is definitely something I think I stumbled on. And then once I discovered it, I was like, oh, that's been there the entire time. I didn't know everyone else didn't want to date somebody who's a girl in preschool. So I think as I kind of discovered that, I felt even more guilt and shame around the whole thing of sex, and there was just no answers. So it's kind of a similar reprimand, like, you don't know what's wrong, but you know it's bad. You know you're gonna get in trouble for it. You know you shouldn't be doing it, and you know it's like, so yeah, I think as I felt that, as I started like getting feelings for girls, I kind of looked for like anybody else who was queer. It's like, maybe I'm the only one in all of Broward County who likes women. How did that happen? And I think it wasn't until junior year of high school that one of the girls in my high school came out. And then later on in that year, one of my classmates like came out as trans and started talking about their whole transition. And boy, me and the two of them, I just like hooked on. It's like, oh my God, somebody has said out loud that this is how they feel like me, and they must have answers, because if they're about to like get their boobs cut off, they must know something. And turned out that, and this person's name is Theo now, Theo didn't know that much about the whole thing either as a junior, but knew that he was ready to be a guy, and that he had already like kind of overcame the whole like shame part about it and was like, all right, everyone's gonna hate me, but I wanna be a guy. So really helpful getting to talk to those two people, which kind of tie back to the first question. Like, these are the things that make me feel like queer community, like somebody else was gonna tell me and like keep showing me. And so those two classmates sent a few Instagram pages, and they are also kind of art people like myself. So one of them is a photographer still, and she had done a lot of like photo series, just kind of about the nude body and like understandings of self. And so I went and asked them like, what is this and how'd you do it? And so definitely through conversations was like my first access. But after community college, it was a lot easier. No credit to UF for that, but definitely credit to the queer community here in Gainesville, the Pride Center of North Central Florida, super active. The Pride Student Union, when I started, was a little bit more welcoming and open. They had done a lot of collaborative events with like the Black Student Union and Latinx student unions here at UF. So getting to hear from like student groups made up of queer people, and then also like community organizations that were focused on queer people. And there was just like once a month I could just find something in Gainesville that was like talking about queer things. Yeah, and I performed like the way I came out. I don't ever say that I came out really. It's just like I was always gay. But the way that I came out, there was a queer poetry night for Pride Month. And so I recited one of my poems there. And so that was like my coming out. And a whole bunch of people followed me and started like sending other stuff. And really since then, like Instagram or the internet has been like the biggest way I've learned things about anything queer sex ed, queer history, and definitely being like a historian and working in oral history, getting to meet elder queer people has changed my life. Like sitting down and talking to like an 80-year-old person who's been queer and like also figured it out like mid-20s when everyone else like already has their first crush like what, 12, 14, you know, starts dating their first boys. So it was super impactful to get to like there's elders who live this life and I can talk to them. They would tell me their stories and share articles, all kinds of things. So
That's awesome. And I'm sure like so insightful as well, just to see it in real time. Somebody who's lived for, you know, longer than us.
Much longer. It has kind of a guidebook, so
yeah,
that's them.
Absolutely. And then are there any particular resources that have helped provide information for you? I know you said Instagram, as well as that person, your friend, the photographer taking those photos, that really helped you just kind of grasp everything. Is there any other particular resources that have helped you in terms of digital media? Or, yeah.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah.
There's like 10 Instagram pages.
Yeah.
And it's a real scrolling through. Yeah, there's a lot of cool ones that talk about different things from, actually I will pull them out.
Yeah, feel free. No, you're more than welcome.
Like there's too many. But people like, I guess the way that we've developed this influencer thing has allowed for these niche markets and like people who just focus in on something. And so for the sex education and especially the queer education, I'm super grateful that that is a thing because then I can find them and like see all of the and be like, oh, this is exactly what this person is talking about for real. So I definitely think a huge one is the intimacy firm. Brittany Broaddus. She is also Christian and she is a trainer, speaker, author, and a social worker, which I think is a huge part of like how she communicates all of this like sex stuff to people because everyone is uncomfortable and there's not usually a pretty packaged way to talk about these things, and she knows, you know, how to just make things accessible and just realistic, very real. I think that's probably the common thread too through all of them. It's very like real. Nobody's BSing you. Yeah. Which is the biggest thing I think caused all the things wrong with sex now.
Totally.
Yeah. Sex with Ashley is another big one.
Oh, I follow her too.
Yeah. Sex educator, actually an intimacy expert themselves. It's found a couple of different groups, talks about things like birth control. So just makes things accessible and real. One of the sillier ones is Bobby Box. This is a man and he works for Grindr. He's a sex educator, which Grindr has all its own problems, but it's a reliable place where there's queer community. Still with that kind of double-edged idea of that, but does always talk about things that like, there's no way I could Google, what do you do when bottoming?
Yeah.
He's like, push out when bottoming. I'm like, you know what? This makes a lot of sense. Like, nobody was going to explain this to me and like how prep works in the body. That's so important for so many people in queer community. There should be a place where like somebody can know how that happens. Like, and he just makes them very like accessible with these little like covers, and you can just go right to it and be like, what are shower douching tips to help me be ready? So just things like that. It's like people are willing to be real and like talk about.
I love that the title is just right there too.
Yeah,
like boom.
Super like, here's what we're talking about. The Lesbian Bar Project is not so much for like the sex ed, but definitely like the queer identity stuff. I didn't know we had one in Florida, like a really old lesbian bar, but it's just like a collection nationwide, and now getting into the UK, of like lesbian owned bars and just lesbian spaces. And I was like, there's lesbian spaces? I would be there. Yeah, there's one I didn't send to you that I should. And there's 2 podcasts that are super cool too.
Perfect.
The one that I sent is The Spread.
Okay.
But also a certified sex educator, is an African woman as well, and is very much like Pan-African. Makes a huge difference, especially like I said, like kind of getting into the history while I'm learning about this whole queerness, both as an identity and as my identity. It's made such an impact to like get to read some of these articles about non-gendered African people, about Second Spirit Native American people, about non-conforming African people who have just continually been there from the beginning. Like, gender swapping, like all of these things are not brand new.
Yeah.
But yeah, The Spread also does like a little question, like common misconceptions about queer relationships. And then it's like, you get to read what other people are dealing with, masturbation myths, debunked. So all of these things, it's like, no one is talking about this. Where would I ever find it out? And then Ultimatum is just a fun one. It's really just like queer memes and jokes and little like silly things going on in like the queer corner of the internet. And I think it makes a big difference because it's really easy to find like that space on the internet for a lot of things, but it's not easy to find like, oh, here's the space for like queer things happening. So that's a few of the pages.
No, that's perfect. Thank you
really
for that.
helped.
Yeah, I can't wait to check them out myself. Perfect. No, thank you for that. Okay, and then I'm a sexuality studies scholar who in particular explores the aspects of sexual journeys and the meanings of pleasure. I use this term sexual journeys to describe the process of exploring and defining our sexual identities as ongoing, not fully arrived, and constantly in progress. So the next question will revolve around these topics. How do you interpret and define the term sexual journey, or what does the term sexual journey mean to you?
Sexual journey? I would kind of say like your experiences and understandings of like sexual things. Like from the beginning, like the first kiss, all the way to like the first time you're in a room alone with someone. Like no matter what happens, I feel like that's a huge part, like understanding like what do I do with this person in this room? Like the first time you're naked with someone, like just all of these little experiences that like shape how you feel in sexual situations. So,
yeah. And has this sexual journey for you been influenced by different media or the internet?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about how women provide each other pleasure that I learned from anywhere else but a video before my first interaction with a woman. Like before I actually got in a room with a woman, I was like, so what do? Where do you ask?
Yeah.
And like this time I was, new to UF. Both of the 2 friends from high school who I mentioned, like kind of having those queer conversations with, they went to different schools. So I came to UF, I would never say alone, but I definitely didn't come with like a core group of friends who knew anything about me already. So there was a lot of like introducing of self And so I think it was a weird jump from very much Christian and like, that's not something we're talking about, parents, to like coming to school and telling people at that time, freshman year, like, oh, I'm bi. And like having people have an understanding of what that meant that I didn't even have. So people had like ideas of things I've done or things that I like to do, or would ask me questions that I could less than not even answer. Like, I've got no idea. Like, yeah, when I came to college, I didn't even know that much about my vagina, much less anyone else's vagina. Like, I hadn't had a wax before at that time, so it's just full natural. I didn't even know what she looked like. I'm not even gonna lie. Never gave her a look in the face. So
when you don't
like,
know,
yeah, didn't even know that like there's things that you can look for. There's things that like you can expect to see. There's things I can like know when something is up. You know, we had no communication. We didn't talk. So it was very, and I definitely would say I was sexually repressed before coming to college. And I think people expect that like people coming from strict parent homes, they have an idea of what's gonna happen. So a lot of people, like I was a marching band in high school and in choir, and, you know, I was very good. I was a very diligent child. I did all of my things. But often like the alumni or like the coaches or like big sibling assistants or whatever who had gone to college and would come back would laugh in the marching band, be like, oh, you're going to Gainesville, like you're gonna cut up, you're going crazy. I got there and I was like, I don't know what's going on to be cutting up. So yeah, I think it's definitely been a journey that more than just the internet, I would say is influenced by, I guess it's still the internet, but like what people have already perceived about queerness and queer people. And that application to me has led me to looking more into it. It's like, oh, I don't know. Yeah. I think one of the earlier questions someone asked in like freshman year, it's like, is scissoring that great? And it's like, I've still never scissored to this day. And the more that I talk to like women who like women now, I'm like, oh, none of us scissor. So I'm like, where did this idea come from? Who told everyone
Straight
we were scissoring? Yeah. I'm like, no, I actually don't know anyone who does that regularly or enjoys it. I know people have tried it and said it sucked. So I'm like, yeah, a lot of my ideas about my identity, I started looking up after people were asking me things. And then the more I like learned, it's like, oh, that was all foolishness too. So
yeah,
definitely a journey.
all learning together. Yeah, absolutely. Ongoing. Learn something new every day.
But yeah, the internet and culture are kind of in a tie for where I'm learning things from. We're not learning anything from culture, but getting things to look up to then learn from. Yeah.
From that. Awesome. Perfect. Okay, great.
How would you define the term pleasure?
Pleasure just means like what brings you joy, like what makes you feel good in general.
Yeah. Cool. And how did you grasp an understanding of pleasure growing up?
I don't think I even knew the word pleasure growing up. So I think when I think of me as a little kid, like what brought me joy was always just like the beach, the sun, summertime. Very much like, you know, island kid, Florida kid things to have to associate with joy, but
the nature aspect of where you were.
Yeah.
And has this definition changed from your youth until now?
Definitely. I mean, because now pleasure is like it has a connotation to it of like being sexual and being physical. But yeah, younger it was just like kind of the natural and the people around me. So yeah.
Cool. Okay, perfect. Okay. As a sexuality studies scholar, it is important that I utilize alternative modes of knowledge production to allow space for creative expression. So before this interview, I had asked you to prepare a pleasure map that allowed you to examine your past to make connections of physical and or sexual pleasure, but it is not restricted to this idea. These next couple of questions will revolve around this art praxis. So please describe your pleasure map, and if possible, your thought process behind your creation.
Oh, okay. So my pleasure map is a collage because I can't draw to save my life. And actually, when Rose asked to do this, I was like, oh, here we go. She's asking me to draw. It's gonna be bad, real bad. But there was a lot of newspapers in the bag, so I basically just tore up the newspapers. My process, I just kind of flipped through and just thought about like, what do I like or what catches my eye? So first I went through and just cut out like some words and phrases, which I'll talk about. And then I thought about some like pictures and whatnot, like scenes, and then added a little just details in. But if we start at the top, it's a little party. It's like a night gathering. It's kind of a mixed group of people, but they're kind of Black and Latin people also. So, you know, we love people of color. But then balance with just water and like expanse. So I kind of find pleasure in both, but really it's in the balance of both. I love to go out and hang out with people and get dressed up and drink and have a good time, but it needs to be some time out in the water also. It's pretty much mandatory for me to be alive. I thought about what brought me pleasure early on, and it was always summer and the sun, so they had to make it in. I put the sun up here because this I used to love doing as a kid, drawing the sun in the upper corner of my paper. So I was like, this is my OG pleasure right here, is just doing a stupid little sun. I added in traveling and vacation because traveling is not always vacation, but I love them both. Imagination has always been really big for me, so a cloud with like we imagine up here because it's really an important part. I know this is a video, but all three of these people smell different. She's got my perfume on because it's me. And then these two people have on a perfume from in the magazine and the newspaper. But this is really like my favorite compliment ever. That brings me the most pleasure is when people are like, you smell so good. And I'm like, I love it. I love it. It's my fave. I like smelling good. It's like, I think it's one of the things I noticed early on. My dad is always wearing cologne. He's just like a strong scented person. And you can always tell like when you're walking behind somebody who just smells good, it's just like, oh my God, they just smell wonderful. And like everybody else around you has a better day because you smell good. So yeah, it's like my little way to like bring people around me pleasure. I didn't get to put it in any other way than her, but her nails are done really nicely. Mine are not at this minute, but they usually are, and it brings me a lot of pleasure to have my nails done and also my hair done and have earrings on. Always gotta have the earring on. So that brings to this section. The next thing that brings me a lot of pleasure is my fashion. I like getting dressed up, having nice earrings on, accessories, outfits. This is not a fit, but this is what was in the magazine to cut out to represent the fit. This is like the active brain, kind of. This is like both sides of the brain working and like doing that thing. That brings me a lot of pleasure because a lot of people just kind of lean into either fully that like artistic side and they're great at communicating with people, but then they don't like do some of like specific things or do things in very like concrete, like get things done ways. But I like to do both. So like having both sides of my brain be active and aware and working, and also that balance. So love that. I put starring in because it brings me a lot of pleasure to perform and like star in things. And so that kind of ties to down here. Also general, at home, anywhere, books, food, music. I'm a happy person. Really, that and some water. I'm good to go. I could be anywhere in the world. I put some chocolate. Also, Dove's slogan was choose pleasure, which I was like, was that always it? But I love chocolate. It makes life fun too. Then this kind of area is kind of more about sounds and specific sounds. I think this is where I get into more of my like adult understanding and like sexual understanding of pleasure. My favorite pleasure thing is the sounds we make. So my favorite sounds we make include basically all these things. Sounds associated with our basic emotions, anger, happiness, surprise. They're universally recognized across cultures, which I also find a lot of pleasure, like culturally connecting and like creating cultural synergy with other people from other places. So how that all tied together. the record player, again, the music, a big part. And I love my record player. It's one thing I wish I could bring with me overseas. Just this feeling, I feel like it's a huge pleasure. Like, clean. Like, things are clean. I love it. I love my apartment clean, and like the air smelling good, and a candle lit, and just, yeah, I like clean things. I don't like cleaning, but I do it a lot because I like when things are clean around me. And I put the clean like kind of over the water too, because it's kind of a similar like pleasure, I feel like that just kind of like serenity of, this is a safe, good like place. Like, yeah, I like it. Yeah, pretty smart, kind of like a triple entendre, because this is kind of how you describe like the dress style that I wear on a basic day. I think most of my clothing pieces could become business casual if I needed them to, like a collared shirt if I really wanted. Also, pretty and smart are like kind of that like balance thing again. Like, there's always like, oh, she's really pretty, or she's dumb, or she's really smart, but she's ugly. So this is something that like being in balance of being pretty and smart brings me a lot of pleasure. And pretty smart people also bring me pleasure. So I like being around pretty smart people. And hold me's right here, because physical touch is also a huge part for me in a romantic relationship specifically. Like, I love being held and like just kissed on, and like having my hand held, and just like being nearby each other, even if it's little things like putting a hand on a thigh, or, you know, rubbing my back or anything. And then here it says the pure imagination, kind of goes to this again, just like having that openness, but here in like that sexual arena, I like to just kind of be imaginative in sexual things. Like, if it's the same thing all the time, I'm like, okay. But there's so many things that you can do and try, and people always think that's like, oh, like, let me do wild stuff, and it's like, what if we tried like teasing each other in the morning, and then going through a whole day of like things, and then come home and like actually do anything. So those are the kind of imaginative things. And this tiny thing here says LGBTQ issues in basically all of this. I like learning about like LGBTQ relations to the rest of the world and the rest of everything, from food to travel to music. I feel like the queer community like has such an interesting creative perspective and has added so much to the world. So I love learning about like queer books, queer music, queer fashion, anything. We love the LGBTs. The Qs, the I, the As, the two spirits, all of them. And then a little passport kind of to tie into this too. So yeah, that's what I think would bring me pleasure.
Awesome.
Yay.
Great. And then my last question about this pleasure map is, it's okay. If you don't want to. How did this art exploration expand your definition of pleasure, if it did?
I definitely think it did, because I kind of had to think about how all of these things fit into that word, and like how they kind of related, and like I never thought about, you know, all of the pleasure, like sexual pleasure, being related to like the water, the beach, the feeling of a good, clean space. But yeah, these are the things that bring me a lot of pleasure, and they are kind of all connected in a way, and they are actually more important to me than I thought. I think that was the biggest one. I was like, oh, these are kind of also the most important things to me, like in the way that I connect to other people. A huge way is like these three are a huge part of like how I connect to other people, like friends, family, anyone. It's always books, food, and music in my house. So yeah, I didn't think about how important pleasure was, I don't think. Yeah.
And finally, my last question to you is, what does it mean to be a queer Floridian?
What does it mean? I think it kind of means that you have an uphill battle at the current time, at least. Not always, but currently it means that there's a lot of fighting for yourself, a lot of advocating for yourself that needs to happen. But it also means that there's a lot of potential for community building and fun events and meeting fun people and getting to have some great experiences. Well, yeah, I think it means balance also.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Whenever you are ready, you can explain your pleasure map to me.
Okay, I'll go from the bottom up this time, see if we have a different explanation.
No worries.
So these 3 things are the things that have always meant my pleasure throughout my life. Books, food, and music have always been and continue to be the things that just like got me going every time. I love a good book. There's not really any in this picture, but they're there in spirit. Food, which healthy food, but also sweets, a little bit of balance, you know, and music and everything. Yeah, balance is a big thing too, that in general brings me pleasure and is also something that like I need. And kind of everything throughout this is to show that balance. So the top here is like a night out, a party, they're hanging out, they're drinking, their hair's done, earrings are on, nails are done. Those are also big things for me. I love when my hair is done, I have locks. I love when they're not done, but I love when they look good. And my nails, you know, like getting dressed up, going out, having a drink. All 3 people here also have different perfume and cologne on, and that's a huge part for me, is like smelling good, and just it makes me feel like happy and clean, and being near other people, I feel like it brings them pleasure and joy for other people to smell good too. So I love getting to provide that thing for them. It doesn't have to be in the summer, but hanging out in the summer is usually much more chill than waiting out in the cold or the mosquitoes or anything else. So summertime brings me a lot of pleasure, vacation, traveling. Also why this passport is here. And I love plants too. I have lots of plants. The sunshine, I always need the sunshine. I could be being a Floridian and an islander, but the sunshine and the water have to be there wherever I'm going. So huge part of my pleasure. I also put the sun here for that, but it's kind of double meaning because I also really loved putting that sun in the corner of your paper in elementary school. So a little bit of pleasure there. And then on this left side is fashion, because it really is important to me. It brings me a lot of pleasure. This is not the fashion here, but fashion in general. My favorite kind of things are the sounds that we make. So this is more like about adult pleasure and not the general pleasure, but my favorite pleasure sexually is either the sound or touch. So I really like the sounds that we make, like screams, sounds associated with emotions, happiness, surprise, and imaginative things. And they're also universally recognized across cultures, which is a huge thing that brings me pleasure, is like culturally connecting and getting to like make synergy and build connections through our culture, which also ties into the books, food, and music, because that's a huge part of everyone's culture and was the first things that I shared with my friends who are all very international too. This is a big one for me. Clean, because that's how clean things feel to me and for me. I like things to be clean around me. Kind of also ties into like smelling good. I like being clean. I like when my brain is in balance too. I like thinking both creative and like high functioning and like getting things done, but also having a good time. So keeping the brain active and staying in balance. But I mean, books and music definitely help with keeping your brain active. I love starring in and performing in general. I love singing. I love acting. I was in an opera recently. It was the best time of my life. So starring in things is definitely a huge part of the pleasure. I like being pretty smart. I like the balance of being pretty and smart, to be a good amount of both, like, you know, welcoming and pretty, but not ever let that belittle my intelligence. I like being around pretty and smart people. It makes things more fun. And usually when you are all together with other pretty smart people, you can get more imaginative. And I think imagination is like the big overarching thing that brings me pleasure, is just being able to be creative and make something happen. I've written a lot of music. I make a lot of food, and it ties a lot into my imagination. So, yeah.
Fabulous.
And speeding. Okay. Would you share a little bit about your relationship to your Floridian identity?
Yeah, I think being a Floridian has impacted everything from my style, the colors I like to wear, to the food that I got to grow up knowing how to make. I've learned how to make a little bit of everything from everywhere. Definitely my music taste has been heavily affected by being a Floridian and really growing up in South Florida. I think that is a big part of the distinction too. Growing up in South Florida versus the rest of Florida has been a really unique experience, and I think shaped my identity as like my cultural identity and my understanding of myself more. I think since I've now experienced going through the South, going up north, northeast, I think being Floridian has been a very funny experience. Florida's really never known for anything great. It's pretty much wildness, which is sometimes accurate, but it's either wildness or like Disney World and the beach. So I've got to live the full in-between experience of all of it. I got to have some funny, wild stories about things that have happened nearby, but then there's also identities and experiences that other Floridians would have that those of us who grew up in like the city and the suburbs in Broward and Miami don't share. There's not as much just rolling agricultural land like there is up North Florida and all the way through the South. So we didn't get any of the experience of being in the South, I'd say, because of growing up in South Florida. But I think we got an even more beautiful experience of being in like this mixed area of culture and language and food and identity and backgrounds, and just getting to have such a mixed and varied experience and palette for everything has turned out for the better, for sure.
Awesome. And then, what does the term queer mean to you, and how does it inform who you are as a person?
I think the term queer means anybody not straight. Anybody beyond the like, I just like one gender, one sex, one identity of person. Everyone else is queer. So it's just kind of a flow of where in the queer you are. And I think since I identify with the term queer myself, I think that it's really just kind of an umbrella term for those who identify as anything in that not straight spectrum and rock with the people who do and like care about the issues of those who are not on the straight side of the spectrum.
Awesome. Great job.
That was so hard.